Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers. Because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD and working on a product to help people overcome these problems because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. My guest is Phillip Hogan. We're going to talk about outsourcing notary signings versus having to only sign in-house. He's part of Signing Services of America. He's the president of the company. So again, we'll talk about notary, mobile notary, that kind of thing. So welcome, Phillip. Thanks for coming.
Richard, thank you for having me.
Yeah, tell me a bit about your background. Like how and why would you get into this kind of service?
Sure. And so, Richard, my grandparents, my father's parents are immigrants from a small island in the Caribbean named Notary. They came to Harlem in the early 1900s and to find a better way. And as a result, they pretty much laid down a path about entrepreneurism. And as a result, my father and uncle became entrepreneurs. And as family children, and my cousins and I, we worked within the family business. And back in those days, there wasn't any kind of, allowances for children to do things for the family. You were told to do it because that's the way it was. And little is that the seed had been planted for me to become an entrepreneur. And so I worked in my father's business for a number of years and really began to understand the business acumen and build upon that business acumen from the foundation that he gave me. So my first true entrepreneurial experience was a nonprofit that I started in Brooklyn, New York, named Housing Matters in New York. And it was a transitional living community for formerly incarcerated nonviolent drug offenders living in Brownsville, Brooklyn. I purchased a house out of foreclosure, converted not a house, but a building out of foreclosure and converted it into the transitional living community. And that was a very successful entrepreneurial enterprise from October of 2000 through October of 2005. And the board and I decided to close. I couldn't get additional funding and I really got burned out. But the bug of wanting to be an entrepreneur continued to fester within me. And then in 2014, by that time I transferred, I relocated to Atlanta, Georgia. And in 2014, I purchased a car out of state. And the dealership sent their notary to my home to get the automobile closing documents loan signed. I had never heard of a traveling notary. Of course, I've heard of a notary, but never a traveling notary. And I was just really fascinated about this particular entrepreneurial opportunity. And I was looking for something that I can get into that didn't require a lot of heavy lifting. And so this was really appealing to me. And so let's see. So once we finished signing the documents, let's just talk about, who, what, and why, and how to become a notary and do what he did. And he explained it to me. And he said, listen, the first thing you need to do, or the last thing you really need to do, is to get your notary stamp, because when you start promoting your business, people are going to be calling. And if you don't have a stamp, they're going to move on to the next person on the list. And I followed his directions very carefully, got my stamp, and sure enough, my phone started ringing and I started doing mobile notary work. And things began to really pick up and I did really well. And as a result, more and more business came. And then finally, in I would say in the latter part of 2015, I got a huge account in Clearwater, Florida. It was sending me a ton of business. I mean, a ton of business. And I just couldn't handle it all. And they wanted to send me more. So I said, well, I talked to some people and it presented my predicament. And it was suggested that I start a signing service. So I had no idea what a signing service was. But in February of 2016, I started Signing Services of America, because I had no choice. I wanted to keep this business and I wanted to grow. And so this is what I needed to do. And the collaboration between myself and this title company was really, really great. They would send us a ton of business. And, rarely does someone open a business and you have immediate customers, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it was. And so that's how I got started. And so, it's just from there we scaled and we just kept scaling. We made some mistakes and we recovered from those mistakes, and we scaled and we scaled and we scaled and we learned. And here we are 8 years later. We have hired over 32,000 notaries, and we've done over $1 billion in various real estate transactions.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've used mobile notary many times for like real estate closings. And I guess I was going to ask you about this, but at least from my experience, like communication is number one. I've had some that they don't answer the phone and it's just last minute. They want to meet you and they're late. It's like, come on, guys, we gotta get moving on this stuff. Like, I don't think notaries realize, like, a lot of people, when they get something notarized, it's a stressful situation. Like for some reason, the active notary, because it's like, it just seems like it's something that carries a lot of importance that I think it just naturally stresses people out, especially with like real estate closings. They want stuff to close. They don't want it to be delayed. They got to get this done. And it's like, so you guys provide a very important service. But like I said, from what I've seen, communication is key. But what have you seen? What do you find is important to customers?
Definitely communication, and certainly, I think the top three are the communication, the accountability, and then the ability to understand the documents to the point where you can, as a notary, you can answer the question that the signer may have because this particular document or stack of documents they're unfamiliar with. Punctuality is another piece that's really, really important. And finally, making sure the documents are correctly executed, right? And that's the purpose of hiring, not to say the purpose, but that's really the benefit of hiring a service such as Signing Services of America, because we reallocate your time. You call us and say, listen, we need a notary. Okay, will you give us a date, time, and all of the important information? We'll go into our database of 65,000 notaries, trained notaries who've worked with us before, and then we'll go ahead and vet them to make sure that they indeed are knowledgeable about the documents that you need them to notarize. And if so, we'll go ahead and dispatch them to you for them to then confirm the call, come to you with the documents, get the documents executed, and whatever needs to be done, scan those back to us, scan those back to our client, or drop them in a FedEx or UPS shipping center for them to be overnighted to your client or to the title company or lender is what the notary will do. And the heavy lifting we do. You see, you don't have to do it. You schedule with us and we will, we'll hire the notary. Everything I just mentioned, we'll do it ourselves. So you just sit back and wait for the notary to call you to confirm the time, date, and signing location and all the other pertinent information that they need to disseminate to you, and they show up and that's it. And that's the convenience of hiring us. Sometimes when you go on your own, it's a potluck kind of situation. And because the accountability is not there, you understand, they're accountable to us and they know that. And that's what makes us work.
Yeah, the best one I ever had, this lady was like, she had a printer in her trunk to print up extra documents. She had a scanner. Like, this lady was like on point. She had everything. Like, even when I went to sign, she had like these laminated things that you put under the paper so the pen don't go dry. And like, she took care of everything. She had extra pens, like everything you could want, that's the best one I've ever seen. But it's, from other ones are okay, but that was like amazing. So what have you seen the notaries that get the best feedback do versus ones that are just like, are not very good?
Sure. One, they're punctual. 2, they allow questions to be asked during the signing. 3, they come prepared, right? And 4, if there's any questions or concerns, the notary will contact us to get those issues resolved so that the signing will continue to move toward closing. And professionally dressed, not professionally, but semi-professionally dressed. In other words, they don't come with shorts and flip-flops and t-shirt. They come with, attire appropriate for the type of business transaction that's going to be conducted. And then, of course, finally, how they present themselves, how do they answer questions, and are they overly talkative? Sometime in the closing, the signers may want to start having a conversation with the notary, and sometimes those conversations can be kind of tilted in another direction that doesn't have anything to do with the purpose of the notary being there. And we tell our notaries, listen, don't engage in those kind of conversations because you're there strictly for business. This is a business transaction, so let's keep it on business and everything's fine. And so those are the feedbacks that we get from the clients that hire us to hire a notary. And if notaries do well, guess what? They'll continue to work for us because we add them to our vetted notary list, because we know, based upon the feedback from the client, based upon the quality of work that the notary has done, that this person is someone who will represent us and themselves in the best light as possible for every transaction. And that's who we want to be at the table with the signers.
Yeah. Well, again, another thing I remember, I'm just calling up all my notary memories. Some had blue ink pens and black ink pens and red. And then a couple, and then they would put those little tabs, those like fluorescent tabs that point to where you sign. And the real good ones knew all the documents. It knew like initial here, sign here, and everything was like marked up with the little tabs and all that. And we just went all through the documents, and they had that little plastic thing over their finger so they could, flip through the documents pretty easy. And like the best ones I've seen, they just had everything for you. It was like real smooth,
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
And that's the experienced notary. Preparing the documents before the signing, that's really a preference of the notary. Some notaries are so experienced, they know exactly where the document needs to be signed, initialed, and notarized. So they don't need to prepare the documents or tag them, quote unquote. And then others are still experienced and they want to do that. And that's fine. The methodology and how the notary chooses to execute documents is up to the notary. What the end result is that your experience with that individual is great. And then, of course, they are returning error-free documents in a timely manner. And that's what's most important. And when I was a notary, I came with the with the rubber finger, right? I came with multiple colored pens because some clients require you to use blue ink and some require black ink. And you have to be prepared. And so, a prepared notary will come, just like you mentioned, multiple colored pens, their notary stamp, possibly a rubber finger. I used to have a sandwich bag full of paper clips and other, office supplies, because you just never know. Sometimes, we get a transaction where the signer has to come to the table with a cashier's check of $45,000 made out to the title company. Well, we don't want that check to get lost. So what do? We paperclip that check to the first page within the signed documents that's going back to title. So when title opens up the package, the check doesn't start flying in the wind. It's attached to documents. And that's really appreciative for our clients. And that's one of the things that we tell our notaries. Remember, your work is you're preparing your work for someone else along the process. And the more efficient and the more organized your package is when it's received to our client, they'll appreciate it and they will immediately begin to go and breaking down their package, because certain things go to the lender, certain documents stay within title, and therefore they can move toward to getting the loan not only closed, but actually funded. So it's really, really important that notaries understand, and we help them to understand that, listen, you're one person in a big machine. And for the machine to flow correctly, we need you to do this level of work at this particular quality. And if you do it well, everybody's happy. You're happy as the signer, notary's happy, we're happy, title's happy, and of course the lenders are happy. And
what about wet signatures? Who requires them and why?
Some states require wet signatures and some states don't. So California is a state where it requires wet signatures, and that's just the requirements of the state, and we can't contest that. What we can do is just know, how things work. And but for the most part, let's see, Florida has accepted the remote online notarization process, right? Which is something that we offer as well. And if your signers don't know what that is, it's basically instead of a notary knocking on your door to meet with you to get documents signed in person, there's a session scheduled between the signers and the notary. Each party is in front of a computer. The notary will upload the documents into the software, the remote online notarization software. There is a security component done before the actual signing of the documents is done. Once that has been complete and your identification has been verified, then the session can go forward. The notary will present the documents that need to be signed, initialed, and notarized. And you as the signer would electronically sign these documents. The notary would electronically notarize the documents and do whatever they need to do. The session can last 15 to 45 minutes, and then it's done. And these documents are now officially signed and verified by KPI, and then sent back to the client for them to do what they need to do. And you have never left your home or your office. It's a very convenient way to have documents signed, and it saves a tremendous amount of time, resources, but most importantly, it's completely legal in the states that have approved for remote online notarization to take place.
Yeah, and I've done it at 1 a.m. So it's much more convenient. You don't have to go through traffic. You don't have to, do it during the day or any of that stuff. It was pretty cool, and it works out.
Yeah, it does. And the most recent file that we've done was in China. We had a U.S. citizen who was in China, and he was selling some property in Texas. And obviously, he wasn't going to come back to Texas to sign real estate documents. So we were contacted to facilitate a RON signing. And not only do we need to facilitate the RON signing, but we also needed to have a Mandarin-speaking notary who was qualified to do a RON signing to conduct this session with the Mandarin-speaking seller in China. So it was a little bit of a complication because it just required a number of factors, cofactors, to ensuring that the file would get done correctly. Obviously having the RON platform, obviously having someone who is experienced in the RON platform, and then finally having someone who is not only a notary, but is actually a Mandarin-speaking notary. And we got it done, no problem. The client was happy. The signers were ecstatic. And of course, the notary was ecstatic because we all collaborated to make something successful. And that's the magic that happens when everybody comes together with the common goal, which is to get these documents signed, executed, and returned back to our clients so that the closing can now unfold and funding can be done.
What kind of transactions still require, wet signature versus can be done everything online?
What kind of transactions require? All transactions are still accepted as a wet signature. I think the other question should be, maybe we should change the question, what transactions can be done in the RON format?
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. What transactions can be done there?
And so just, again, depends upon the state. And so we do estate plannings, right? And so the law firm wanted the estate plannings to be done in a RON format. And the estate planning packages consist of the power of attorney, the will, and then the trust. And of course, the trustees would sign the documents. So when we conducted our research, we find out that the POAs, or the power of attorneys, and the wills could not be done in a RON format in the state of Missouri. The only documents that could be signed by RON in Missouri are the trusts. So we went back to the estate planning law firm head attorney, shared with him what we found. He thanked us for that and decided to just get the entire package signed with the wet signature because it would become too expensive to have two different types of signings done and then pay the cost for each particular product to be used. So that's an example where the state does allow RONs to be done, but they don't allow RONs to be done on a particular type of product.
What about situations where you get someone that wants to read every document and it's 100 pages, let's say it's a real estate closing, and what does the notary do besides poke their eyes out with a pen waiting?
Poke their eyes out and wait?
What do they do? That's sitting there oh my gosh.
That's what they do. They just sit and wait because, that's part of the customer service, right? You don't rush somebody because you've got other things to do. The notary should always be expected to book at least a minimum of an hour for signing. And then it's based upon the product that we send them. And experienced notaries will know, I don't want to kind of like get too heavy into it, but we do a mixture of loan products. And one of the products is a reverse mortgage, or better known as a home equity conversion mortgage. And that's simply for a senior citizen who, has a certain amount of equity in their property, and they want to now tap into the equity to pay off their existing monthly payments. And so they use what's called a home equity conversion mortgage. Well, that's a very lengthy process. And not only is it lengthy to prepare for the senior citizen to qualify this, but also for the closing. And so when we assign it to the notary, they know, okay, well, we're not doing a seller-side transaction. We're doing a reverse mortgage that's with the senior citizen that's generally going to take about an hour to 2 hours. So when we are searching for a notary, we're going to make sure that they have the propensity to understand what's required to make this successful. Well, you can't go in there with, 30 minutes and expect it to be done. It's just not going to happen. So we are very careful in assigning closings or signings to notary to make sure not only are they skilled, but we want to make sure they have the composure to meet with individuals and give that signing what it needs from themselves. And if you don't have the time, hey, say, listen, I don't have the time, or you know what, I just don't want to, I'm not ready to do that type of product. And we're okay with that, but if you do get it, you bet your bottom dollar, you better sit your butt down and allow these people to read this thing word for word, ask as many questions as they want, and then get everything signed, notarized, and get out of there. But you don't rush people. Oh, no.
Okay, I gotcha. If you're dealing with senior citizens, does anyone ever bring like an eye loop or a big magnifying glass? So would that be insulting? Like, is there any accommodations that they need?
No, that's something that the signer would have to bring themselves. It's not a requirement that the notary asks. Now, when the notary is there, if it's very obvious that the signer has difficulty reading things, then the notary has every right to pause the signing, give us a call, inform us as to when I say give us a call in the office, inform us of what's going on, and then we'll contact our client, which is probably title, and say, listen, the notary is stating that in this case, the signer has difficulty reading, and they're not understanding what they're reading, and please advise how we should proceed. Whatever the title says they want us to do, we'll do. Now, we've had a real case situation where the signer, or one of the signers, had dementia, and the notary called us, and we called the signer, we called the client, said pause the signing, and we will adjourn the signing. We'll speak with our lender and figure something out, and we'll let you know when it's time, if it's going to be rescheduled.
Okay. And where do mobile notaries usually go? To someone's house? Or like, I always would do mine in Starbucks, but maybe I'm weird. Like, where do they happen?
Starbucks, at restaurants, restaurants, at home, at place of business, usually at home, but it depends also if, let's just say, the signing requires witnesses and the signers do not have any family members or neighbors that can serve as a witness, then the signing would be rescheduled to sign at a public place, possibly a UPS or maybe a restaurant, where members of the staff of the UPS could serve as a witness, or maybe the manager or other employees of the restaurant can serve as a witness. So,
Wow. So there's some that even with a notary, you still need additional witnesses?
Yes, it depends. What's the document? What's the most, meaning most what?
What's the most way, like, what's the craziest one you've done where you're like, it needs a notary and it needs like 2 or 3 witnesses? Like, what's the most that's needed you've ever seen for a sign?
Sure. It depends on the state. Florida requires 2 witnesses, right? New Mexico requires 2 witnesses. Georgia requires 2 witnesses. So again, the states dictate how documents are to be signed and who are to be the signers. We don't set those policies at all. That's something that the state does. And we need to know what the state laws are so we can hire a notary and also have the notary bring a witness or speak with the signers to have a witness at the signing table. Now, yet another thing that is something that is a signing service we should know is that some states require for real estate transactions to be executed by a notary must be in the presence of an attorney. So we call those attorney states. And North Carolina, South Carolina, Connecticut, Delaware, West Virginia, I believe it's in Massachusetts, are attorney states where an attorney for a real estate transaction The signing must be conducted in the presence of a real estate attorney for them to oversee the full execution of the documents. A notary cannot be there alone. The notary can accompany the attorney and serve as a notary, but the notary cannot be the lead in a attorney state signing.
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting. Any other stories that shed light on what it's like to, do this process? Any like crazy stuff that happened, or, a situation that happened where you're like, oh, wow, I didn't know about that. And you changed how you did your process?
Yeah, in 8 years, I've worked with, like I said, we work with over 32,000 notaries. And so I've learned how to work with notaries. When I first started, we were really sort of like just using our scheduling software to hire and book a notary and expecting the notary to go get the deals done. And we realized over the years that was not the best way to manage the notary, that we really had to get hands-on and manage a mobile workforce. And so we began implementing different techniques to strengthen the relationship between the signing service and the notaries. One of the features is that we doing on Tuesday, we suspended this for now. We're going to resume shortly. We do Tuesday night NSA talks, and it's a free opportunity for notaries to jump on a Zoom call, and I lead it out, and we talk with the notaries specifically about things that's going on within what I say the halls and walls of Signing Service America, right? That notaries need to know about, so when you say accepting our orders, you won't trip and fumble like somebody else has already done. We find that to be incredibly successful, because now they realize, now they have access to me in a very structured format, and they're able to freely talk about concerns that they have in working for my company. And it's helped me to really identify some really sharp notaries, and it's also helped the notaries to understand that, hey, at the end of the day, Phillip Hogan is a human being. He is approachable. He's compassionate. He's knowledgeable. He's available, and he cares. And they needed to know that. And that type of foundation, if you will, has allowed us to really build a solid relationship with these notaries where we pretty much are getting what we're expecting from them. And I think that's the biggest shift. That's kind of like one of the major changes that has occurred over the 8 years. Yeah, there's other stories, early wackadoo stories, that I could talk about. But I think that's really, I like to shed light on something that we have done to improve the relationship with the notary signing community, which has also helped us and has also helped our clients.
Any requirements changing? Like nowadays, I mean, it sounds crazy, but a lot of people just don't write anymore. They just text and use computers. People not learning cursive, things like that. Are any notaries moving to fingerprints, or like you take a picture of the person plus their ID or holding their ID, or are there any digital type security things like you text their phone, or do you see any of that coming up in notary? Like how is it changing, if at all?
Great question. And in 2015, when I was at 2014 through 2016, I was, using notary, and we were taking pictures of a person's ID with our cell phone and then sending it to the client and destroying it. And I've encouraged the notaries not to do that anymore, right? And when you're setting up the appointment, you're doing a confirmation call with the signer. You want to ask the signers, if possible, the time permits, to please come to the signing with a copy of your ID. Therefore, it doesn't put the notary at risk, anything happening, and they lose their phone gets hacked, and some, God-fearing thing happens to the phone, and then all of a sudden you got these people's ID on your phone. Now you become liable, right? So we're a big proponent on reducing liability, and that's a big liability for the notary as well as us. In regard to the ultimate requirements for a notary to verify the presence of the signer and that the signer's signature is valid, that hasn't changed. The notary must be in the presence of the signer, witnessing them to execute the documents. The notary must verify your ID by looking at passport IDs, government IDs, these documents, it must be done. That just can't change. AI cannot interfere or intervene with this process of the notary verifying the ID of the signature. Fingerprints, that can be used, it's really on a case-by-case scenario. It's something that I haven't really run into in my time as a notary or the owner of a company. And in regard to any other kind of crazy things, you have to remember, right? The notary, if you don't know, and your audience doesn't know, that the notary has been commissioned by the clerk of the superior court. right? So we go through, a complete process of taking the test. And once we pass the test, then we are commissioned by the clerk of the Superior Court. So we're actually working on behalf of the court to witness these documents. So we're bound to be as legal as possible. And any kind of shenanigans is not going to happen. Any kind of shortcuts is not going to happen. It's just too much risk involved here. And, nobody wants to be subpoenaed and have to go to court and testify, yada, yada, yada. We don't want to do that. So just do what's required as is required, and all will be well.
Yeah, I guess as a notary, when you take your oath and everything, if there's a dispute, then the court can and will subpoena you sometimes to appear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the notaries have to have a journal, right? And so we have a journal, and in that journal, we make very specific entries in regard to the documents that we notarize. Who was the signer, the time, the date of the signing, and possibly the type of the signing. So if a notary is subpoenaed to court, more than likely, they're not only going to subpoena you, but as a notary, they will subpoena me and my journal. And my journal will be evidence that I indeed met with, Jane Doe on September 4th, 2022 at 11 p.m. and signed these documents, right?
Okay, makes sense. All right, Phil. Well, how can people get in touch? Where can they go to get notary services from your organization?
We would love to talk to anyone from your audience who needs our services. They would just simply go to our website, www.signingservicesofamerica.com. Scroll to the bottom of the page. There is a consultation form. Fill it out. That'll come to me. I'll reach out and schedule some time to talk, learn about what it is you need from us, how we can help you, and then we move forward. So that website again is www.signingservicesofamerica.com.
And then out of the 50 states, do you cover all of them, or are there certain ones that you don't cover?
We cover all states. We're national.
Very, very good. Okay. Well, Philip, thanks so much for coming on the call. It's been interesting, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me. I had a ball.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.
Clerk of the Superior Court. So we're actually working on behalf of the court to witness these documents. So we're bound to be as legal as possible. And any kind of shenanigans is not going to happen. Any kind of shortcuts is not going to happen. It's just too much risk involved here. And, nobody wants to be subpoenaed and have to go to court and testify, yada, yada, yada. We don't want to do that. So just do what's required as is required, and all will be well.
Yeah, I guess as a notary, when you take your oath and everything, if there's a dispute, then the court can and will subpoena you sometimes to appear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then the notaries have to have a journal, right? And so we have a journal, and in that journal, we make very specific entries in regard to the documents that we notarize. Who was the signer, the time, the date of the signing, and possibly the type of the signing. So if a notary is subpoenaed to court, more than likely, they're not only going to subpoena you, but as a notary, they will subpoena me and my journal. And my journal will be evidence that I indeed met with, Jane Doe on September 4th, 2022 at 11 p.m. and signed these documents, right?
Okay, makes sense. All right, Phil. Well, how can people get in touch? Where can they go to get notary services from your organization?
We would love to talk to anyone from your audience who needs our services. They would just simply go to our website, www.signingservicesofamerica.com. Scroll to the bottom of the page. There is a consultation form. Fill it out. That'll come to me. I'll reach out and schedule some time to talk, learn about what it is you need from us, how we can help you, and then we move forward. So that website again is www.signingservicesofamerica.com.
And then out of the 50 states, do you cover all of them, or are there certain ones that you don't cover?
We cover all states. We're national.
Very, very good. Okay. Well, Philip, thanks so much for coming on the call. It's been interesting, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me. I had a ball.
If you like this podcast, Please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed. Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed. When advice is needed.